BBC News. Hello, I'm Jerry Smith. Initial results in Afghanistan's presidential election suggest victory for the incumbent Ashraf Ghani. He secured just over half the vote, narrowly avoiding a second round. But his main rival, Dr. Abdullah, has already rejected the result. Our Afghanistan correspondent, Sikandar Kamani, says the dispute has wider ramifications for the peace process.
President Trump called to an end the talks that had been going on between the US and the Taliban in September, just as a deal was on the verge of being signed. Those talks have now recently restarted, but the confusion over these election results, one senior former diplomat was telling me, was creating the worst possible backdrop for peace talks with the Taliban. At the moment, we have to be clear, the Taliban are not talking to Afghan government figures. They say they'll only do that once they reach a deal with the US. But President Ghani had hoped that a strong mandate in these elections would give him good leverage to go into talks with the Taliban. This confusion doesn't necessarily give him that.
India's Prime Minister Narendra Modi has accused his political opponents of spreading lies about a new citizenship law. There's been more than a week of large protests against the legislation. It offers Indian citizenship to some migrants fleeing religious persecution, but doesn't include Muslims. John McGivering reports.
Narendra Modi was addressing a rally of supporters in the capital Delhi as his party, the BJP, launched its campaign for state elections there. Using fiery rhetoric, he accused opponents of deliberately misleading people. Indian Muslims, whose forefathers lived in India, had nothing to fear from the law, he said. More than 20 people have died in the last 10 days in clashes between the security forces and opponents of the law. Several thousand protesters have been detained, some briefly, and internet services suspended as the authorities battle to restore order.
The British supermarket chain Tesco has halted production at a Chinese supplier that's been accused of using forced prison labour to make charity Christmas cards. Here's Michael Bristow.
When a 6-year-old girl in Britain opened a Christmas card bought at Tesco, she found a chilling message written inside. The note, scrawled in capital letters, said foreign prisoners at a jail in Shanghai were being forced to work against their will. It asked whoever opened the card to contact human rights organisations. A Tesco spokeswoman said the supermarket chain was shocked at the discovery. She said the Chinese firm had only recently been audited and there'd been no indication that it had broken a Tesco rule that bans the use of prisoners to make its products.
Turkish state media say at least 25,000 civilians have fled fighting in the Syrian province of Idlib over the past 2 days. They're reported to have headed north. There's been an intensification of the clashes between government forces and rebel groups in Idlib. News from the BBC. An investigation has concluded that the Mexican founder of an ultra-conservative Roman Catholic order sexually abused as many as 60 children. Marcial Maciel, who established the Legionaries of Christ, died in 2008, 2 years after being forced to retire by Pope Benedict. The Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison has acknowledged that global warming contributed to the devastating bushfires sweeping across a large part of the country. But he rejected any sudden change in government policy and insisted Australia was beating its targets on reducing carbon emissions. Mr Morrison has just returned from a much criticised holiday to Hawaii. More than 100 fires are burning in the state of New South Wales. Our reporter, Shaima Khalil, is in Balmoral, near Sydney.
Many people have been told it's still extremely dangerous for them to come back, and you can see why. I mean, the fires are still going. The roads here have been closed. Firefighters have been telling people they can't get in and out of the area just yet. I mean, all around us, the smoke, the smouldering trees, there is a real danger as well of those tree trunks and branches cracking and opening. You could hear them crackling in the background.
Votes are being cast in the first round of Croatia's presidential election after a campaign focusing on living standards and the country's dwindling population. The current head of state, Kolinda Grabar-Kitarović, is facing a stiff challenge from the former Prime Minister Zoran Milanovic. Another leading candidate is a nationalist folk singer, Miroslav Škoro. The two front-runners will go through to a second round of voting in January. And thousands of mourners have gathered in the Bangladeshi capital Dhaka to pay their respects to Fazle Hassan Abed, the founder of the world's largest non-government organisation known as BRAC. And those are the latest stories from BBC News.